I'm looking forward to this. I'm really excited about being able to share with you all. And thank you so much, Mary, for inviting me to take this almost impossible responsibility of going over the trumpets in 2 sessions, especially if there's questions and comments. But I heard you say that you're asking them to write down the questions and comments until after. And I think that will be easier because there really is a lot of big information that I'm going to cover today. I'm not going to go into details, specifics, dates, or names, but I'm going to look at the book of Revelation in a very big view to see the forest instead of the trees and the bark and the little bugs climbing on the trees. So I'm hoping that will be helpful. And we're going to be able to see together that the book of Revelation covers very large thoughts. I'll go quickly into verse 1, and then we'll break down a few other verses in the bigger picture as we get into verses 3 and onward. So, when he had opened the 7th seal. Now, this is the final of the 7. The first started in chapter 6. And by the way, it was the Lamb that opened the seals. And so when it says he had opened the seal, it's talking about Jesus Christ, the Lamb as he'd been slain, in chapter 5, verse 6. So when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now, silence in heaven. Okay, so if we wanted to search this phrase, silence in heaven, to see how many times it occurs in the Bible, we would find that only one time, I'll make this bigger so you can see, one time right there is where it shows that there is this phrase in the Bible. So it's not like you can go to other verses and try to find out what the silence in heaven is, but what you can do is search this specific Greek word. Now, you'll notice with my program, it's called Accordance. It's a very good program. It's free. You can get it yourself if you want. But if I hover over a word, you'll see it turn blue. If that word is in the original language. So, and is in the Greek, when is in the Greek. This word he is not, had is not, opened is, the is not, 7th seal, etc. So this word silence is in the original language. So what I'm going to do is right click and search for this key number, and I'm going to find that it's only 2 times that this verse occurs in the King James Bible. Notice what happens in Acts 21 verse 40 when it shows up the first time. When he had given him license, Paul, we know who that is, he stood on the stairs and he beckoned with the hand unto the people. So imagine him lifting up his hand and kind of getting everybody to wait or silence. And when there was made a great silence, you'll see that I have selected this word to be in red when it is found in a query. And so this word silence and this word silence is both red. That's because they're both the words that I'm looking for. Now, the word silence itself would occur more times, but the Greek word for silence in Revelation 8, verse 1 is only used one other time. Now, this is a great multitude of people that's standing in front of Paul, and he is on the stairs, beckoning with the hand to the people, not person. And so it's a group. And there was this great silence. In other words, there wasn't emptiness, there was a great hush. And he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying, and then you can find out later what he said if you read that for yourself. But there was a silence in heaven. Now that does not mean that heaven will be empty. It means that there will be a great hush, about the space of half an hour. Now, listen, that's incredible. Now, why is it incredible? Because what we're learning in the Bible so far is that in heaven, there's going to be a time where everybody in heaven is quiet. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, to my understanding. Now, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers, but I have done a lot of study and I've come up with a few things. Now, so what happens is when Jesus Christ is told by his Father that it's time to come. Remember in Matthew 24, I think it's verse 36, but I don't remember exactly. I could look it up if you're interested. Jesus said, "No man knows the hour of the day for the coming of the Son of Man." No, not the Father in heaven, nor even the angels. It says also in Mark, I think, that not even the Son of Man understands or knows that day. Now, some people could say that means that he hasn't made it revealed yet. Well, fine. Christ made it clear that everything that we are told in silence, we're supposed to speak on the rooftops. So if Jesus had known and just wasn't yet revealing it, then he might have been saying or doing something contrary to his own counsel. I'm just saying, there are some things that he wanted to tell them that they weren't ready for yet. You can read about that in John, I think it's chapter 16. But there is, I think it's pretty clear that if Christ hadn't yet revealed it, it's because the Father hadn't yet revealed it to him. So the Father hadn't revealed it to the Son or to the angels according to the Bible. So now, when the Father sends his Son, Jesus Christ said in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, all through the Bible, many times in the book of Matthew, when Jesus comes, he will come with all his angels, with the glory of his Father, not with his Father. I do have a study on that. If you're interested, I could show it to you. It's Matthew 25. I did this a while ago for a group in Australia, and it was, I think, the part B or C. I don't remember. You'd have to look, or I could look for you. But it's a study where it shows from the Bible that Jesus is coming with the angels, not with the Father. So who's in heaven that's quietly waiting for something to occur? I believe, according to my study, now you may differ, that's fine. I'm not going to, war over this one. But it seems to me that the Father himself will be in heaven waiting for the final harvest, just like he was waiting for the first fruits when Jesus came up and ascended the first time. So when Jesus ascended the first time, remember, he took captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. He brought before the Father those gifts. He was able to show them this is the first fruits because the harvest is coming. And so when the Father sends the Son to get the harvest, everybody will leave heaven and Christ will bring everybody to the Father. And that's when Christ is able to break the silence, if you will, that's in heaven, because the Father is hushed and waiting for people like you. I love that thought. It's just beautiful. Anyways, let's go now to Revelation chapter 8. When he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about the space of half an hour. Now, we know that if you're looking at time in the Bible, many times, not always, but many times it can be something that is symbolic, or what we call prophetic time. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of homework right here to show you some numbers. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and I'm going to show you that 24 divided by 48 is 05, so that's half. Now, we know that if 24 divided by 24, that would be 1, right? Well, if you wanted to get half an hour out of a 24-hour day, you would divide it by 48. Now, if you wanted to say that every day which is 24 hours, is equal to a year, then you would do this. You would do the biblical year, which is 360 days, divided by 48, and you will find that it's 7.5, okay? So really, if this was prophetic days, if this was prophetic time, a half an hour, we know that it would be equal to 7.5 days. Now, I'm going to say something that maybe not every one of you is familiar with, but listen. According to the Bible, the seventh day is the Sabbath, and it happened after 6 days of creation, and on the seventh day, God rested from all of his works. It was actually God the Father and his Son, because God the Father created all things through his Son. That's why he said, let us make man in our image. That's in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Anyways, and you know it's us being two, because there was Adam and there was Eve. There wasn't Adam, Eve, and little baby, right? So just Adam and Eve, that's all. That's us in the image, right? That's the Father and the Son. Anyways, what we have is that the Father and the Son created through the 6 days and rested the seventh. Now, it's clear according to the Bible in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, Revelation 14, verse 12, that the saints at the end of time will be keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. Now, it does say, I'll show you this verse actually, it says in Revelation chapter 22, verse 14, blessed are they that do his commandments, that, here's the reason why, that they may have right to the tree of life. Now, where's the tree of life? That's up in heaven. And may enter in through the gates into the city. That's in heaven, my friends. So Revelation 22 is the very last chapter of the book, of the entire Bible, and it's saying there's a blessing, which is, by the way, the seventh blessing in the book, there's a blessing on those who keep the commandments. Now, listen, if people are able to get into heaven having never kept the Sabbath, having never kept the law, Satan would be able to say, that's not fair because I broke the law and I haven't kept it and you're not letting me back in there yet. What's going on? And so now Jesus and the Father, in the councils between them both, not three, both, you have the consideration that, hey, okay, Jesus, when I send you, Son of God, when I send you, I want you to take a full 7 days, and even a little longer, 7.5 days from earth to heaven, so that every single one of the people that comes from earth to heaven, no matter when they lived, all the way from Genesis to Revelation, every one of them would have been able to keep my entire law, including the seventh-day Sabbath. That's why I believe it's 7.5 literal days, which is half an hour in prophetic time. And then every single one of God's people will be able to have kept the Sabbath. And that's why the Bible says in Isaiah that the gates are open to those, to the righteous nation that keep the law, right? And so the gates are opened and the righteous nation will walk right in. Why? Because they've been blessed by keeping the commandments and they have right to the tree of life, and they may enter in through the gates into the city, as it says in Revelation 22:14. So that's why I believe it's saying that there's silence in heaven for about the space of 7.5 days. It's because God the Father has sent his Son, and God the Father is quietly waiting for you and for me after a 7.5 day period, which for God is like no time at all, because each day is like 1,000 years. And so for us, 7 days is going to be like, a moment. And each, you go back and forth with that with God. And so, and that's in 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe. Anyways, what we have is that God is going to send his Son. Everybody keeps the Sabbath coming back into heaven, and God the Father will be there to wait for us. I'm so excited for that day, and I really, really, truly want to be there. That's why I have committed every single day that I have to God, so that I can be with him, with his Son, with the holy angels, and with the redeemed throughout the ceaseless ages of time. Now, verse 2. I saw the 7 angels which stood before God. Okay, we got to think about that for a second. I saw the 7 angels which stood before God. Okay, so let's look at this right here in Revelation chapter 1, verse 4. You guys have already gone over this before, but there are 7 spirits which are before his throne. Now, who's his? That would be the Father. What's his throne? That's where he sits, right? So the Father is on his throne, and there's 7 spirits which are before his throne. Wait a minute. Revelation chapter 8 said, I saw 7 angels which stood before God. Where's God? God is on his throne. You can see that in chapter 1, you can see it in chapter 4, you can see it in chapter 5. And so the Father is on his throne, and there's 7 angels standing there before God. Wait a minute. Revelation 1 verse 4 says there's 7 spirits which are standing before the throne. Well, guess what? The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 1 verse 7 that of the angels, God said, who makes his angels spirits. So God is the one who makes his angels spirits. And his ministers, which by the way, if you learn that word by going into the Greek, it's amazing. Okay, I'm just telling you. So these angels are spirits, and his ministers are a flame of fire. Oh, so now you know what happened on the day of Pentecost. There were angels, which are spirits that were sent by God to come down like flames of fire on the foreheads of the apostles in Acts chapter 2. So now what we have in Revelation chapter 8 is 7 angels, because remember the angels are made spirits. So the 7 angels are standing before God. And that's why in Revelation 1 verse 4, there's 7 spirits which are before his throne. Same idea. They are actual beings that are doing God's word. In fact, they're doing his liturgy. They are doing his work. They are public ministers for God, as that word that I was referring to in Hebrews 1:7 says. I saw those 7 angels which stood before God while he's on his throne, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Now, what is a trumpet for? Let's look and see what Jeremiah 4 verse 19 says. My bowels, that means the inner part of your emotions. My bowels, I am pained at my very heart. The first time the Bible uses the word heart is in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, and it refers to the thoughts and imaginations of the heart. It's your mind. So my emotions, I am pained in my very mind. My heart makes a noise within me. I cannot hold my peace because thou hast heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Okay, now we're going to get into some stuff here that will be like kind of an oversight a little bit. Now, follow along with me, okay? This is huge. I'm going to tell you in just a very short time the first half of the book of Revelation, which is chapters 1 through 11, okay? In chapter 1, you have a picture of Jesus where he has, remember, the bright face, the white hair. He has the feet like burnished bronze. He has the candles or the 7 stars in his right hand. He's amidst the candlestick. You remember that, right? Well, that's the picture of Jesus in chapter 1, followed by 7 churches, okay? Now then, in chapter 5, you have a picture of Jesus. That's when he is a lamb. Well, before that, he was mentioned as a lion. When John turned around to see the lion, he actually saw a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits, which are angels, sent forth into all the earth. And by the way, Revelation 5 is the same exact time as Acts chapter 2. And that's when the angels were sent forth to be flames of fire on the heads of the apostles. Anyways, you have Jesus as a picture there in Revelation chapter 5, and then it's followed by 7 seals. Okay, now, listen. Picture of Jesus in chapter 1, 7 churches. Picture of Jesus in chapter 5, 7 seals. There's a picture of Jesus in chapter 8, and then 7 trumpets. Wait a minute. Picture of Jesus, 7. Picture of Jesus, 7. Picture of Jesus, 7. You just saw the first half of the book of Revelation. There's a picture of Jesus and the history of the churches from the time that Jesus was on the earth until the second coming of Jesus. There's a picture of Jesus in Revelation 5, followed by 7 seals, which are dealing with the civil nations from the time that Christ came to the earth all the way to the second coming. Now in the trumpets, you're going to see a picture of Jesus, and you're going to see the 7 trumpets dealing with the war history from the time of Christ up until the second coming of Christ. Now, picture of Jesus, church history. Picture of Jesus, civil history. Picture of Jesus, war history or military history. That's the first half of the book of Revelation. It's fascinating because you can get into more details than just that big oversight that I gave you now. But what's amazing is you can see that the churches are following the history from the time of Christ to the time of Christ. The seals are going from the time of Christ to the time of Christ. The trumpets are going from the time of Christ to the time of Christ. There's 3 identical pictures of the same history from different perspectives, okay? There's church or ecclesiastical history, there is civil history, and there is military history. There's church activity, there's nations and what their decisions are, whether they're going to receive the curses and the blessings, and that's all of what's in the seals, by the way. And then you see the history of the wars being how God's people are being warred over and warred upon, generally because of judgments by God to his people to try to call them back. You can read about that in Hosea. The Lord has wounded and he will heal as well. So it's like the parent who loves their child so much that because they're making that decision, he is going to or she is going to actually, as the Bible says, hit them with a rod, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child. That's from the Bible, that idea. And so when you when you do not spare the rod upon your child, it's not because you hate them. It's because you love them. You want them to learn from their mistakes and to understand wisdom. And that's what God was doing through the churches, through the seals, and through the trumpets. Really, it's a huge picture of God's dealings with his people from the time that Christ was here until the second coming. Now, let's go back to Revelation chapter 8, and we'll read verse 3. Now, another angel, wait a minute, what did we just talk about? 7 angels stood before the throne, because that's where God is, and they were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came, and he stood at the altar. Wait a minute, who stands at the altar? Well, yes, angels do that in the heavenly sanctuary, because really the word angel simply means a messenger. That's the word right there. And so the word messenger is something that can be applied to, yes, the angels, but anybody that has a message. By the way, you, if you have a message from God, are an angel. That means you're a messenger, okay? And that's how, by the way, we get messages from heaven, and that's how heaven gets messages from the earth, is through the angelic ministry. I could show you that from the Bible. I don't think I'm going to now, only because we're focusing on the trumpets. We're not focusing on the angels. But this is another angel that came and stood before the altar, having a golden censer. Golden censer, what does that mean? Well, look, I'm going to show you something really quite interesting, to me anyways. There is a picture here that I drew years ago of the sanctuary, okay? And this is the north up here. This is the south down here. This is the east, and this is the west. That's how that is laid out. And that's how it is always laid out. And the reason why is because God is always on the north, and that's why he's here on the table of showbread, which represents the throne with 2 crowns and 2 stacks of bread. And then there's also a throne here. And this area over here is where you would be not facing when you come into the sanctuary, because you're going to be heading from the east going toward the west. Because God did not want people to be facing toward the east with the sun rising. You can learn about that in Ezekiel chapter 8 and 9. So unfortunately, God's people have turned away from the place where God is, and they have gone toward the east, and that's where a lot of problems have come. That's why the Sabbath keeping is so important, because Sunday is just what that is, the day of the sun. Now, right here in the outer court, which you can see named here, this is where the laver and the burnt offering are. This is representing the earthly ministry of Christ. When he ascended after the cross, he entered into the holy place, which is right here. All of this is made of gold. All of this is made of bronze. So we have bronze, we have gold. Now in here, this is also gold. Now when Christ stands before the incense, it's very interesting because he's already been at the candlesticks. That was in chapter 1, the first time you saw Christ, and then you see the picture of the 7 churches. In chapter 5, he sits upon the throne with his Father. That's why he took the book from the right hand of the throne so he could sit down. And that's where you see Christ sitting in the book of Revelation on the table of showbread. Now in chapter 8, he's over here by the altar of incense. Okay, that's why it says, another angel came and stood before the altar having a golden censer. All of this is golden. That's why he has a golden censer. This is chapter 1, this is chapter 5, this is chapter 8, and this is where we are right now. So going back over here, another angel came and stood at the altar having a golden censer. So now you know where he is in the sanctuary. And by the way, this golden censer is used for 2 areas. It's used for the daily, regular ministry of the priests. In this case, it's the high priest. And it is also, so that would be the incense altar. Also, it is used during the Day of Atonement, during the time where the high priest goes only once a year into this place. He does not go in any other time. If he does, he will die. There are no exceptions. So this area right here is where Christ is, but you're wondering, like, what is he doing? Is he working in the holy place, or is he working in the most holy place? The answer is yes. He's working in both right here in Revelation chapter 8. He's working first here, and then he is working here. And so you'll see that in verse 3 of Revelation 8, another angel came and stood at the altar having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense. Now, he didn't have it to begin with, but there was given unto him much incense. Now, when would that be? Would that be during the time where he was given the opportunity to start ministry? Yes. That's when he started working here, okay, in the holy place. Now, so when it says there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. Okay, so wait a minute. He was given incense, that he should offer that with the prayers. Now notice, if you go back to Revelation chapter 5, you're going to see in verse 8, that when Christ, he, the Lamb, had taken the book, which was on the throne so that he could sit on it, and that's why you read in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20, that Christ overcame and was able to sit with his Father on his throne. It says, the 4 beasts and the 24 elders, they fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials, which were full of the odors, which are the prayers of the saints. So wait a minute. The 4 beasts and the 24 elders, each of them had golden vials, which are full of prayers. Wait, what? Yes, that's exactly what it says. Now, why does it say that? Well, because the 24 elders are not the humans that were resurrected with Christ that came up to heaven to then be the 24 elders. No, absolutely not. It breaks chronology. It takes the book of Revelation and twists it all around, if that's true. But what you do see is consistent with the book Desire of Ages, which I believe is inspired. And it says toward the 800s, I don't remember what page, 832 or something like that. I don't remember. I could find it. But you can see that those that came with Christ were brought before the Father, and the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures were actually waved back by Christ so that he could present these people to the Lord. So the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures were already in heaven in chapter 4 before the Lamb even came into the throne room. So if they were there before Christ, hey, wait a minute. They were singing before the Father, all glory and honor and power, holy, 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 before Christ came in? Wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. So they were there before Christ, but they were the ones that Christ was offering to the Father as the first fruits? No, that doesn't make sense either. So like I said, you're twisting the book of Revelation. Anyways, in chapter 5, the 24 elders are the angels, and the 4 living creatures are the angels. You can see that in Ezekiel chapter 1 and 10 if you're interested. But what you find is that they have the prayers. Why do they have the prayers? Well, because that's how God is able to hear the prayers, and that's how the prayers are able to be answered. You can see that in Genesis chapter 28, verses 11 through 13. Write that down. Genesis 28, 11 through 13. Because what you find there is that God the Father is standing on a ladder, at the top of the ladder. The ladder represents Jesus. You can learn about that in John chapter 1, verse 51, where Jesus says that angels will ascend and descend upon the Son of Man. And so the ladder reaches from heaven all the way to the earth. The Father's standing on top of the altar, and then angels are ascending and descending upon that ladder. What are the angels doing? Well, their name is messenger. And so they give a message from the Father all the way down to Jacob, telling him that the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the ones, or is the one that's going to give you, Jacob, land. And that's the message that the Father sends to Jacob while he was dreaming, because of the angels and because of Christ. So Christ and angels were able to co-work together to be able to answer that. Now, the prayers go up and down the same way. Angel messengers, angel messengers. That's why they ascend and descend like lightning in Ezekiel chapter 1. That's why, for example, Gabriel came to Daniel and said to him, hey, your prayers were heard in heaven, and I've been told to come down here and answer your prayer by explaining the gospel to you. And that's why angels came down like the flames of fire in Acts chapter 2, and angels were talking with Zechariah, and angels were talking with John the Revelator, and that's why Jesus said in Revelation 22, verse 16, I have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. So, by the way, Jesus has an angel, that's why he says, I have sent mine angel. Anyways, that's what's happening here is the angels are the ones that have the prayers in chapter 5. And that's why the angels are the ones who gave to this other angel that's standing before the golden altar with the golden censer. They gave him the incense that he can offer it with the prayers of the saints. You see, Christ was able to enter into heaven, and then it was given to him to take over that prayer ministry as the high priest, right? That's why he was anointed, by the way. And he was anointed by his Father. You can read about that in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. It says that his God, Christ's God, which is the Father, anointed him with angels, even above his fellows, which would be the angels. So they were anointed because they're all priests. Jesus is the high priest, and they were able to do ministry as a result. But Jesus had to be given that incense, and that's what it says there in chapter, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. So they had the golden vials, which are full of the odors, which are the prayers of the saints. And that's why it says in chapter 8, verse 3, this another angel is Christ, the Son of God, who is now ministering before the Father, along with the angels who are standing there before God. And he came and stood at the altar, which, by the way, if you remember, is right before God. Because, well, okay, so at this point he's here. So the altar of incense is being used during this time, and it's right there before God. In this case, remember, God is on the sides of the north. And then you can see also later that God is here, and the altar of incense is being referred to as useful at that time as well. But at this point, Christ is standing in the holy place, and he stands at the altar, given a golden censer rather, and there was given unto him, because he didn't have it yet, it was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar which is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which would be your prayers, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Okay, wow. Now this is Christ according to my understanding. And why? Why is that Christ? Well, because what's happening is that the angel standing at the altar, the golden altar, is Christ. And he's the one that's able to offer before the Father the incense. He is the only mediator between God and men. So this angel here, with the prayers that were given to him, is representing Christ as the only mediator between God and men. So your prayers are heard because of the angels ascending and descending, but only because of Christ, who is before the Father. So really, it's Christ and angels that are co-working together so that you can be able to be heard and blessed as a result of heaven. Now, you may ask, wait a minute, are you saying that God doesn't hear everything? Well, yes, he may hear everything, but how does everybody else know that he hears everything? Well, the reason why everybody knows that he hears everything is because he is chosen to demonstrate that he hears everything by actual agents that ascend and descend from heaven so that nobody can question whether or not he's gotten the message or not. Like, so, if God was doing everything with his arms crossed, nobody was able to see him or hear him or know what was in his mind, and he's just saying, listen, that's what I'm doing. Satan would be like, what? Wait, no way. I don't believe you. He's like, no, I did it. Trust me. I'm God. That's not fair. I can't understand. This is not a good way to run a judgment. And so God is not running a judgment that way. In fact, at the end of time, everything that God has done will be verified in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. That stands for God just as much as it stands for you. And so what we have here is the Father demonstrating that he hears us and answers us by using 2 or 3 witnesses, angels and his Son, to be able to minister on behalf of you and me. So all of this basically goes down to the judgment where you might say, well, God doesn't need angels. Yes, he does, because there is a judgment that's coming and everything needs to be made known during that time. Okay, so that's smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the Son of God's hand. He is an angel, he is a messenger. And the angel took the censer, filled it with fire of the altar. Now, why did he fill it with fire? The reason why he filled it with fire of the altar is because now we have moved from the holy place where he's standing before the Father on the table of showbread, but now we've moved to the place where he really needs a lot of incense because now it's the Day of Atonement. And that's why he filled the incense, or the censer, as it says. Filled it with fire. He took the censer, filled it with fire of the altar, and that's why right here all the incense goes up over the veil, which represents the flesh of Christ, according to Hebrews chapter 10, and it comes into the most holy place and fills it with smoke, okay? So that's when we transition, right here in verse 5, from the holy place to the most holy place, as far as I can tell. So the angel, which is Christ, took the censer, filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it unto the earth. Why did he cast it to the earth? Because there will be no more intercession. No more intercession with Christ standing with the censer before the Father. It will be cast into the earth, no more intercession. And there were voices, which, by the way, comes from the angels. And there were thunderings, which, by the way, comes from the angels. And there was lightnings, which, by the way, comes from the angels. And there was an earthquake, which comes and also from the angels. And so you have the ministration of the Father through the Son and the angels all working together here at the end of time. Now the 7 angels, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. Wow. So they are preparing. Now, okay. What we have seen is that the angels are standing with the Father. They have trumpets. They are preparing to sound so that there is war on the earth. So basically, like the church history, the civil history, the military history. Then you have this interaction of Christ where he was in the holy place and then in the most holy place. Now, why did he switch? Why did he change? I'll tell you why. In Revelation chapter 1, the first picture of Jesus, he's standing before the candlesticks, showing that he is ministering during the entire time of the 7 churches. Then in chapter 5, he's standing there with the Father on the table of showbread, and he's showing that he's ministering during the entire time of the 7 seals. In chapter 8, he's standing in front of the altar of incense so that he is able to show to everybody that he is ministering during the entire time of the 7 trumpets. So Christ is the high priest. He's the one that received the incense. He's the one that stands in front of the altar. He's the one that stands in front of the candlesticks as well. And he's there before the Father, which is on the throne or the table of showbread. So we have this amazing experience with the book of Revelation describing what Christ is doing through these 3 separate historic pictures of what happened during the time Christ was on the earth until the second coming of Christ, through the ecclesiastical, through the civil, and the military fronts of history. Now, you might remember in the churches that there was a really good church. It was like blessed. There was no condemnation to that church, except, a little bit toward the end. But it's where, the 7 angels were, or the 7 stars were there. And Christ was right there in the midst of those candlesticks. Christ was there with them. Well, the next church, they ended up getting persecuted, and there was like bloodshed as a result. Well, the next church, they started getting darkness, and God was saying, you have some people there. I do not like their doctrine. And then the 4th church, wow, it was really ugly. And that's where you go from the time of Christ till the persecution, till the early onset of the Dark Ages, and then you're in the midst of the Dark Ages. So you can see the depth of darkness going on in the churches. Well, you see the same thing in the seals. The first horse was white, which is a beautiful color. The next horse was red, kind of like the churches where the bloodshed occurred. The next horse was black, wow, just like the beginning of the Dark Ages, like in the churches. And then the final church was pale, because it was in the midst of the Dark Ages, and there was that 4th church. So there's a correlation between the churches and the seals. Well, the same thing happens here in the trumpets. I'm going to show you just real quick here what you have in these thoughts. Okay, so the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood. So, okay, hail. How big is hail? Well, you could say that I've actually been in Romania where I saw hail the size of golf balls, okay? It was pretty big. It didn't break much. I think it cracked a few windows, but it was kind of scary. I didn't want to go out because that would hurt, right? So the first is like hail. Notice what happens as we continue on. The second is like a great mountain. Okay, the first you have hail, which is really small, and then you have a mountain, which is quite bigger. Well, the third, let's see, the third angel, he sounded, and there was a great star. Ooh, that's quite a bit bigger. Well, all right, then the fourth angel sounded, and there was a sun that was smitten. Whoa! Okay, so we're talking about hail, and then something bigger, a mountain, and then something bigger, a star, and then something bigger, the sun. What's happening in the trumpets is you're actually seeing visually that, yes, it's bad, but it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then it gets really bad. So it's the same thing that happened in the churches and in the seals. It's good to start, which is like hailstones, big deal. No, God's hailstones, I get it. They're a big deal because that's part of the 7 last plagues, right? But compared to the sun, it's small. So, okay, it was good with the first church, it was good with the first seal, and it's kind of good with the first trumpet, but it gets kind of bad with the second church and the second seal and the second trumpet. Now it's a mountain. Well, it gets worse with the third church, and the third seal, and the third trumpet, which is now a star. And then it gets really bad in the fourth church, in the fourth seal, and in the fourth trumpet, which is the sun. So it's the same kind of thing. God is very merciful to his first people. They were able to walk with Christ. They were able to walk with Peter. They were able to know Paul. They were able to interact with John and Barnabas and Mark and like Matthew and the good Judas. The bad one, about him according to Matthew chapter 27, I think, 28, 27. So what happens is that just like the history of the churches is the history of the seals, which is also like the history of the trumpets. You're going through God's history from the time of Christ up until the second coming, and what you're seeing is it starts off okay and it gets progressively worse. And the reason why is because God's people continue to fail to honor him in all that they do. Now, the reason being is because in the second church, the second seal, and the second trumpet, there was a lot of bloodshed as a result of God's people losing their lives for the sake of the gospel. As a result of losing their lives, they turned from the gospel and went the easier route, going to the broad road instead of staying on the narrow way. That's something that's going to happen to us again in the future. Do not believe for a second that it's going to be beautiful and glorious and there's going to be sunshine and butterflies from here until the time Christ comes. It will not be that way. It's going to be very tough for God's people. And you're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to stand with Christ during the time where it gets tough. Now, I've made up my mind, no matter what goes on, I want God to keep me. Now, whether I'll be faithful during that time, I don't know, because I'm just as frail as everybody else. But I have made up my mind at least that I want to be faithful in thick and in thin. And so may God keep all of us faithful. Anyways, that's a basic overview of Revelation chapter 8, verses 1 through the end. Now, we didn't get into the specifics of the trumpets and the names and dates and locations. I trust that you would be interested to read Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation, the original one from 1897. I do have it available online. It's free. You can download it. You could print it if you want, but it's a very big book. You might as well just read it. And that would be at the revelationwithdaniel.com website under resources and books. And then you could read for yourself all the history that you like. I'm not going to cover that history in these meetings that we have, but I do want you to have an overview to know that it's churches, the civil history, and here the military history. So if you have been blessed, then praise God.